Hello, this is Key Ideas, and I'm your host, Leela Viss. This podcast contemplates the rhythm of life as a piano teacher and music maker. Through illuminating interviews and transparent reflections, you'll feel validated, encouraged, and empowered. This is episode number 54, and it's quite different from any episode here at Key Ideas. It's called a solo spotlight. It's different because of the pact I made with myself to work smarter and not harder. You can hear my proclamation back in my season opener, episode number 48. It's when I discuss the need for realigning my priorities. Including this type of episode in the Key Ideas lineup is one step closer to that realignment for two reasons. First, although I adore chatting with friends and colleagues in the music field, it's not easy to find the time to squeeze in the interviews and all the editing that follows. This solo format saves me time and frankly cuts out the chit-chat that can clutter interviews. The second reason for the change? I give credit to one of my favorite quotes. The smartest person in the room is the room. Although I'd like to think I'm above average when it comes to intelligence, there's tons of experts that know so much more than I do, and I want to learn from them, and I bet you do too. It makes sense to share the airtime with the room from time to time. Today's expert is Jana Carlson. She spins a tale with twists and turns as a piano teacher turned website designer, and shares what she calls her piano teacher big life change toolbox. The tools that she stumbled upon through her ups and downs may be just what you need for your studio. Before I hand the microphone over to Jana, here's a little more about her background.
Jana Carlson enjoys simplifying growth for small business owners, especially music teachers. As a piano teacher turned web designer, she has helped other teachers fill their studios quickly, max out their wait lists, and create new income streams online. Jana loves exploring new intersections between technology and teaching that make life simpler and more enjoyable. In the fall of 2021, she successfully ran her studio for 2 months while traveling abroad without teaching a single lesson, using the concept of a virtual studio. Jana co-owns Studio Rocket Web Design with her husband, Jeremy. They enjoy playing music together as a classically trained pianist and a rock and roll guitar player. They recently moved from the U.S. to Portugal, where they split their time between building websites and eating too many Portuguese pastries.
Hi, my name is Jana Carlson. This is the story of how I went from owning a large group piano studio in North Carolina to being an online piano teacher in Washington State, and then to living in northern Portugal, all within 3 years. I hope you enjoy my story, and I hope it's helpful in thinking about how you approach your own big life changes as a music teacher. In the summer of 2017, I attended the 88 Creative Keys workshop in Denver. It was hosted by Leela and Bradley Soash, and it was life-changing for me in several ways. First of all, I expanded my piano pedagogy toolkit in ways that absolutely transformed my teaching that year, and if I'm honest, every year since then. Second, spending time in Colorado again, I'd spent several summers there in my 20s, opened up something inside of me. My husband, Jeremy, and I had lived in North Carolina for most of our marriage, and he had actually been restless for a while. He's a California native. I was perfectly content in North Carolina, though, and had built a strong studio reputation in our city. We'd bought a lovely home several years earlier, and I saw us growing old there. But then came 88 Creative Keys and Colorado. That visit left me longing for something new, a change of scenery and pace and lifestyle. My extended family had moved to the Northwest recently, and visiting them felt similar. Big sky, clean air, bright sunshine, the West. So Jeremy and I started planning, and in 2019, we moved from North Carolina to Eastern Washington. We sold our home, we bought a new one, we moved everything across the country, and we truly felt like we were starting over. Now, you already know that we aren't in Washington anymore. Between then and now, a lot of life has happened. But I'm starting back in 2019 because along this journey, I've created my own toolkit for navigating big life changes as a piano teacher. Traditional one-on-one piano lessons have pretty clear limitations, as we all learned quickly in 2020. When I was a kid taking piano lessons, my teacher could only teach one student at a time after school, and she was paid per lesson. Sounds familiar, right? That meant, as you fully understand, that she was not making a sustainable income, and if she took a week off, she was not paid. Thank goodness technology and our teaching community have helped us change that whole situation. The landscape looks very different now, and it has been fun, if terrifying at times, to learn to make my studio flex with my life when needed, rather than requiring life to flex with my studio, which it occasionally refuses to do anyway. I'm sharing my journey with the hope that, by the end of this episode, you will have a better understanding of the tools you already have in your big life change toolbox, and maybe you'll have several new ones. Okay, so back to the summer of 2019 and our cross-country move to Washington. I left behind a thriving group piano studio of around 65 students. I had a high-energy studio that had really become its own community. I was making a nice income, and my website was on page 1 of Google, organically. It was a lot to leave behind, and I understood that it would take a long time to rebuild. So I added my first tool to my music teacher life change toolbox: online piano lessons. I offered to continue teaching my North Carolina students online in a one-on-one format. While I was reluctant to go back to private lessons, I knew that continuing to work with current students would provide two valuable things. First, I would be able to continue teaching students I knew. When you're starting over, everything feels new and overwhelming. So I knew it would be nice to continue seeing students I already had relationships with. And second, it would provide that base level of income as I was rebuilding. So I offered online lessons to families, and a handful of them said yes, which was a lucky thing. Because once we were settled, it became clear that our new home in Eastern Washington was not the right space for a piano studio. It was a big upset of my plans, and I was even more grateful for my online students. Jeremy and I had started Studio Rocket Web Design together back in 2018, building websites for music teachers. After moving, we put more time into growing that business. I continued teaching about a dozen of my North Carolina students online each week, and we started settling into our new home city. But something never felt quite right. It was kind of an uneasy fit from the beginning. We just didn't grow to love Eastern Washington. And then the winter hit. The first snow arrived in late September that year, and by Halloween, it had snowed 4 times. Did I mention we moved from North Carolina? We'd done some research on the climate, and we had visited the area prior to moving, but we had underestimated the length of the winter and how gray it stays during those months. We couldn't put our finger on what it was exactly because on paper our new city was very nice, but Eastern Washington just felt like the wrong fit for us. Honestly, we felt stuck. It had been an enormous endeavor to move across the country, and we weren't going anywhere anytime soon. So we tried to find things in and about our new city that did feel more like home, trusting that we'd eventually make friends and become more comfortable there. And then the pandemic hit in early 2020, and things turned upside down. Instead of exploring more of our city, finding restaurants we liked, and meeting new friends, we hunkered down. My piano parents were so happy that we'd moved to online lessons the previous year. With so much about their kids' lives being turned upside down, they were able to have normal piano lessons. I was able to really settle into teaching online, which for me means I started experimenting. I used technology to expand what we were able to do. I incorporated Leela's digital badge boards for all kinds of things. My students collaborated on composing projects, using the voice record function on their phones. I even started implementing occasional online group lessons. Dorla Aparicio had moved her entire group studio online, and I was able to observe one of her classes. I learned how to have my students mute themselves while just one student was unmuted, and then they would lead the group. I started playing duets every week with my students, so they would mute themselves and play along with me. My toolbox was expanding. Okay, back to Jeremy and I, in the summer of 2020, feeling cut off from the community we had yet to plug into in our still new city. We went on long daily walks. We processed a lot together about the decisions we'd made and where we found ourselves, and our conversation began to focus on our future. Jeremy and I felt like our current path was not the right one for us. We wanted something different from our current life, different from our future as we saw it. We started talking about how life could look for us. We're middle-aged, without kids, self-employed, and our work is solely online. So we could actually entertain some pretty wild ideas, and we did. We started brainstorming on those walks way outside of our normal box. What if we become digital nomads? What if we sell everything and move to South America? What if we rent out our home short-term and split our time between the US and other countries? I think we even talked for a brief minute about traveling the country full-time in an RV. What emerged was that we wanted a different life. We wanted to flip everything on its head and begin something new. We wanted to move to another country. It feels important to recognize the privilege of being able to say that and then make it happen. We know that's not the case for a lot of people, and we don't take it for granted. And as a piano teacher, I realized I was very lucky to be able to teach from anywhere now that my lessons were solely online. The country of Portugal had been on our radar for a while for a number of reasons. It's one of the safest countries in the world. It's one of the easiest countries in Europe to immigrate to as an American. In general, it's a lot more affordable than the US. A lot of people speak English. The country is beautiful and easy to access the rest of Europe from. The climate, while it does face similar changes, like the US does as of late, is more mild. The healthcare is excellent and way more affordable than it is in the US. So we made a decision. In the spring of 2021, we sold our home in Eastern Washington. We also sold or gave away almost all of our belongings. We put the small amount of stuff we kept into storage. We checked our 2 cats into a cat hotel, and we went to travel in Portugal for 2 months. We wanted to be absolutely certain that Portugal really felt like the right fit for us, particularly after we had missed the mark on our last big move. And we also wanted to figure out where in the country we might want to settle first. The new studio year began while we were in Portugal, and I knew ahead of time that it would be unrealistic to teach weekly lessons while we were traveling. So I added a virtual studio to my life change teaching toolbox. If you're not familiar with a virtual studio, I've written about it extensively on my blog, and I'll link that in the show notes. Essentially, a virtual studio is a password-protected area of your studio website where families can log in and find materials and resources to enhance their lesson experience at home. You might already have some version of this on your website. I used my virtual studio to keep lessons going for 2 months while I was traveling, without showing up for a single lesson. This is one of my favorite tools from the last several years of my life adventures, because every one of us as teachers eventually has a period of time where life takes us away from teaching in a way that's hard to plan for. Whether it's maternity leave, caring for a sick family member, extended travel, whatever it is, consistent lessons and income are not always possible. Or they weren't until the virtual studio. Here's how I set mine up. Before we left our Washington home in the spring and I sold my pianos, I created a vault of lesson material for my students. The lessons were comprised of original, multi-level rote teaching videos, printable studio licensed sheet music from composers like Daniel McFarlane, special family inclusive music challenges, and an interactive practice chart. When the new studio year started, I had 2 weeks worth of material in the virtual studio, and then every other week I would switch it out for new material. My students logged into our virtual studio and followed the new lesson material throughout their practice. It was a highly effective way to keep lessons going without my actual presence, particularly for the first 6 weeks. The final 2 weeks were a little questionable. Virtual studios will not be replacing us as piano teachers anytime soon. Once we were back in the US, we started preparing for our big move, and I went back to my normal online lessons. Jeremy and I downsized even further. We applied for our Portuguese visas, we found housing in Portugal, and we booked our flights. And then at the end of this June, we moved. We are located in northern Portugal in the gorgeous city of Braga. It's the oldest city in the country. It was founded by the Romans more than 2,000 years ago, and it's reflected in the amazing architecture. Our lives have changed dramatically. We walk everywhere or we take the bus. We don't have a car anymore. We're finding it easy to make friends with both our Portuguese neighbors and other Americans who live here. We're starting to learn a little Portuguese, which is a super difficult language, and we've figured out where to find most of the things that we need. We're learning to be patient with the bureaucracy. We're adapting to being without certain things, like spicy food. We're learning what requires extra time and planning here, like getting that large piece of furniture back to our apartment without a car, or printing out documents at a local copy shop, or topping off our cell phone plans every 2 weeks. So far, we love living in Portugal. It's already feeling like home. The quality of our life has improved noticeably. Our pace has slowed. The food we eat is fresh, delicious, and affordable. We feel safe everywhere we go, day and night. And we have fantastic healthcare, which is also affordable. And I'm still teaching my North Carolina piano students. One of my families is actually preparing for their own upcoming move abroad, and will continue lessons between our 2 new home countries. So if you asked me to assemble a piano teacher's big life change toolbox for you, here is what you would get. I've used all these tools very effectively, but the order and the importance of each would depend on your situation, which is, of course, going to be different than mine. Tool number 1 that I would give you is online lessons. Now, there is a 99% chance that this tool, thanks to the pandemic, is already in your toolbox. And while many teachers hope to never have to use it again, keep it in your box. Music lessons online offer a unique freedom to both teacher and student that is invaluable in certain life situations. Tool number 2 that I would give you is a strong relationship with your studio families. I didn't talk about this earlier, but the families who stuck with me for the years after my time in North Carolina were a little bit unique. They'd been in my studio for quite a while, and we had established a sense of trust. They had already followed me from private lessons and music labs to group lessons, and I made a point of keeping really good communication with them. When I was ready to implement a big change, they were willing to follow me. It's 100% worth investing in good, clear, respectful communication with your studio families. The third tool that I would give you is a virtual studio. A while before I officially introduced my virtual studio to families, I unofficially introduced it. I built the virtual studio on my website and used it for 2 weeks of fun music assignments after our spring recital. Families got used to accessing material through my website. They practiced using the videos, and everyone had a great time. When I introduced it as a temporary replacement for lessons, there were 0 complaints or even questions because it was not new. I'd recommend adding a virtual studio to your website long before you might actually need it. Let families use it and benefit from it, and then when you really need it for something bigger, it'll feel familiar and positive. The fourth tool that I would give you in your big life change toolbox is a website that supports your new direction. In order to have a virtual studio, you obviously need to have a website. But also, if you're going to make a big change, whether that's a move across the country or a move to group piano from private lessons, you'll likely lose a few students. So get your website ready well in advance. Make sure it's attracting students to your new direction, whether that's online teaching, lessons in a new city, or your upcoming group piano program. Particularly if you're moving to a new area and want to attract students in that city or town, it's essential that you change your website's SEO in advance, as far as possible in advance, to reflect that change. And here's a little sneak peek. I'll talk more in depth about how to use your website to support big changes in Leela's next podcast episode. So earlier, I mentioned that Jeremy and I started Studio Rocket Web Design specifically to help music teachers with their website. I made an important discovery while working with music teachers. We tend to be a pretty DIY bunch of people, aren't we? And I've found that a lot of music teachers actually want to build their own website and be able to make changes to it. They often just don't know how to start or how to make space for that learning curve in their brains. So last year, through our business, I created a course. It's called the Standout Studio, and it guides music teachers through the process of creating their own SEO-friendly website in Squarespace. It takes away every unknown and gives teachers a clear path to succeeding with a website. You start with thinking about who you really want to attract to your studio. Then you create content that is geared toward exactly that student or family. You receive guides that make it super easy to write your copy and get great photos, and then you build your beautiful new website one step at a time. You'll also learn how to make sure that your website is seen in Google through a module that steps you through SEO in simple terms. Oh, and you get a small course inside of the bigger course that helps you build your own virtual studio. The Standout Studio opens for enrollment twice a year, and the next opening is coming up on October 26th of 2022, which is why I'm talking about it now. We've created a special discount code for Leela's audience, and that code is listed in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about the Standout Studio, you can click the link below. Thanks for listening to my story, friends. I hope you enjoyed it, and more importantly, I hope that you are feeling a bit more confident about your own big life change toolbox that will support you down the road, whatever life brings to your studio.
A big thank you to Janna for taking the time to map out her adventures over the past 3 years and share with us what she's learned from them. I know I'm excited to rethink my options as I consider making my studio more mobile in the years to come. But wait, Janna's not quite finished. Stay tuned for next week's episode when Janna helps you explore the ways that your life and studio intersect. Again, she has some tools to help you find freedom in those intersections. You don't want to miss Janna's challenge to reconsider how you make decisions in your life. Boy, do I need to hear this one. Head to the show notes for links to learn more about Janna and her upcoming course, the Standout Studio. I could gush on and on about it, but I'll hold off till next time. Until then, I'm Leela Viss, and see you in the trenches.